Welcome back. Welcome back. This is lecture 2 of The Dark Knight Rises. And if you haven't seen the first one, and if you're watching on YouTube, it should be above here. And, well, we're going to solve some problems today. That's exactly what we're going to do. Because, all I did in the first lecture was I essentially told you, here is what Batman is struggling with. Here's what Bruce Wayne is struggling with. But, well, we got to figure out how he solves it. We got to figure out what he does. This is the hero idea. The idea is very, very simple. It's like, okay, I'm going to take what he does and I'm going to implement it in my life. And one of the things that I've noticed is that, well, for all of the good things that I have done, I could take what I've done and match it to a specific hero. I think that's one of the things that's really, really cool. Like, it just works. It just works. It's like, okay, the reason why we have these stories are to actually, well, because they make sense and because they actually have worked. The idea is really simple. It's like, you imagine that it's worked about 50 times in real life. So then you take that 50 times, you take away all the variation between all the different ones, and you extract one giant story, one, we'll say, meta story. And then for the 50 people who've actually done it and who are, well, who it makes sense to them, they're going to like the movie, right? They're going to like the movie, and then it kind of works like that. So that's something I find really cool. But anyways, that's what we're going to do now. So we're going to take this Batman figure, this Batman problem, and we're going to see if we could solve it. So what happens here is, just a little recap, right? Batman's a cripple. Or Bruce Wayne is a cripple. And where is he? He's sitting right there with his nice little walker. He's got his beard. Usually the beard is a representation of, like, hasn't shaved in a while, hasn't been keeping up with himself. And, well, he's got to wake up, right? What's going to happen? He's got to wake up. He's got to reemerge from the depths. And this is something that I see really, really often, actually, surprisingly, in older people. Because the thing about, well, so I'll say older people to start, and then we'll sort of bring it down. So one of the things that is unfathomably true is that for whatever reason, the time when the most people run a marathon for the first time, the age is 29 years old. And the reason behind that is really simple. It's like, okay, you're sitting there, and you realize that you kind of wasted your 20s. One of the biggest regrets of the people in their 30s is that they wasted their 20s, which sounds about right. And it's funny, I could imagine, like, maybe I'll be 29, and I'm sitting there, I'll say, just like Batman, essentially, I just wasted 8 years of my life. And, well, I want to do something that not only makes me feel like I'm achieving something, because that's something that I missed for my entire 20s, it's also something that makes me feel like I'm not being restricted by the system. I'm not losing my individuality, and that's an idea that we explored in The Dark Knight. So, in 29, for whatever reason, you have, well, for those reasons, presumably, you have a huge spike in the amount of people that run and finish their first marathon. And, well, Batman's going through something like that. Something resembling a midlife crisis, something resembling a reemergence, a reemergence of a goal that he has previously failed on. I really like that idea because, well, you notice, the literature on this is really quite clear, which is an unfortunate reality, but on average it takes about someone 9 tries to quit smoking. You imagine, you say, okay, I'm going to try to quit smoking, and then once I'm done with it, I'm done with it, and that's sort of the end. But the reality is, it takes 9 attempts to really even keep going. So one of the struggles that young people really struggle with, and God, the amount of times I've struggled with this is really, really difficult. It's not fixing the things that you're noticing for the first time. It's fixing the things that that you should fix. Like, I think social media is killing me and my friends. There's sleep schedules. I think sleep schedules is one one of the most brutal problems for young people nowadays, because it's like we all know that we should probably get 8 hours of sleep and wake up at around the same time every single day. But the amount of people that do that, in my experience, is very, very low. And it's because, well, first of all, you have phones, right? We like to stay up late. And at the same time, it's like, especially in college, there's so much wiggle room that you don't really have to wake up at the same time. So what happens is you have sort of this perpetual cycle of, okay, you know what, maybe I should fix my sleep schedule. Maybe I should get off social media. Maybe I should, start breaking these bad habits. But unfortunately, it's not that simple. Unfortunately, it's like, okay, I could say that I'm going to do it. I could say that I'm going to try to fix myself, and I'm going to wake up, and I'm going to suddenly reemerge from the depths. But the reality is, well, it's not that easy, and that's what Batman's going to struggle with Bane. So the first thing that has to happen is he has to wake up, right? He has to realize, okay, maybe there is something out there for me. So many things happen here. One of the people that wake him up is the girl, right? And that's a very archetypal idea. I don't really want to get too into it, but the idea that a woman wakes up a man's conscience, right? Or yeah. That's a Beauty and the Beast idea. I explored that idea a lot more deeply. But, well, you could imagine that he's looking for a girl, and a girl shows up who's somewhat worthy, so he wants to go after her. It's like, okay, that makes some sense. Then you have someone like Lucius Fox. Where's Lucius Fox? He wakes him up and he says, "Oh, okay, just for old time's sake, let me show you some of the things that we're doing." And then you have someone like Alfred, who really wakes him up, right? Who really wakes him up and says, "Hey, listen, you could grow, right? Stop stagnating. All I want you to do is to, well, be a person," right? I think there was a great quote by Carl Jung that I don't know if I'm going to botch it, but I'll try it. If it weren't for, yes, I got it. If it weren't for the leaping and twinkling of the soul, man would rot away in his greatest passion, idleness. I'll say that again. If it weren't for the leaping and twinkling of the soul, man would rot away in his greatest passion, idleness. And I really like that idea. It's like, okay, you imagine the default position for humans. Where would we be if it weren't for any sort of motivation, right? If it weren't for, well, goals and school and work and, monetary incentives and all the things that our culture has established for us, where would we be? It's like sitting on the couch watching TV or laying in bed watching Netflix. Like, that is where we would be. And this is one of the things that, well, TV and social media has been able to prove. It's like, well, if you procrastinate on your work, what are you doing while you're procrastinating? You're not going out and playing basketball. A very small percentage of people are doing that. Most of the people are literally sitting, on doing whatever on the couch. And I call this something like the Garfield instinct. And because Garfield is the guy who hates Mondays and just wants to sit on his couch and do nothing, and he's super lazy. So I think we all have this sort of default idleness that exists within us, and what really happens is we need this leaping and twinkling of the soul. We need something to push us in the direction, or not we're just going to stay doing nothing. And, well, that's one of the problems I see with young people, and I'll consider myself part of that young people. It's the idea that, well, you ask somebody, right, and this is a career perspective, you ask somebody, what do you want to do with your life? And if somebody gives you an answer of either I don't know or something like the thing that my parents want me to do, then there's no leaping and twinkling of the soul, right? There's no motivation that, yes, there's no resulting motivation that comes from, well, achieving something that you want. It's a basic idea. And what really happens there is I notice that for those people, they struggle to do their work. They struggle to do their homework. They struggle to get up off the couch and stop procrastinating because there's no leaping and twinkling of the soul. There's nothing that's actually motivating them to get there. It's more of just the social pressures want me to do it, or, maybe one day I'll make some money. But the real question is, and this is the thing that I think most people are struggling with now, is something like, what do you want? Right? What do you want? And if you never answered the question, what do you want, then you don't have, first of all, a strong goal to go for, and then you don't have the leaping and twinkling of the soul. You have nothing that pushes you forward because you have no idea where to push forward to. And, well, call that a modern day struggle, because I think that's one of the things that I've noticed. But So Batman experiences this. Batman says, okay, or at least Bruce Wayne at this point says, I'm going to wake up, right? I'm going to wake up. We have these people around me who are, well, first of all, I have a goal, right? And second of all, I have a meaningful goal. So that's pretty good. Lucius Fox kind of shows him around, and he says, wow, like, here are all the things that I made. And what happens right after that? You have Batman fixes up his leg. He fixes up his knee because he says, all right, I'm actually going to do something to help myself. He goes down into the Batcave for the first time, right? This is the experience of waking up. This is the experience of saying, I'm going to actually, well, I have some sort of motivation to actually go and do something, to stop being idle. So now, then I want to see where I'm going with this. So what happens is Bane breaks into the stock market, and okay, yes. So now we have Batman sort of, The Dark Knight Rises, right? That's the that's the title of the movie. That's exactly what happens, right? We have the reemergence of the soul. That we could say that it's a weird idea. It's a weird idea. Something like evil wakes you up. It's an idea I haven't been really able to grapple with, or at least grapple with completely, but it's an idea that, well, it's made its way throughout all the literature. Like, you think of something like Adam and Eve, right? Who's the one who wakes them up? Who's the one who shows them the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, right? Who's the one who brings them down to earth? It's the snake. It's the representation of Satan. The same idea in Aladdin, where in Aladdin, it's like, who's the one who shows him the cave of wonders? Which is really the magic carpet and the genie. It's like, who's the one who shows it to him? It's the devil. It's Satan. It's the evil character. Well, that's a tough idea. That's a really tough idea to work with. But on a micro scale, it can make sense if we kind of break it down in the way that in the examples that we've been using. So, for example, you realize that, okay, I haven't really been getting my work done, right? I've been procrastinating too much, you could say. And, well, what does that mean, right? What is the first thing that you do when you say that? You say, okay, maybe I should stop procrastinating. So what's really happening inside of you, could say, is the evil within you, or the laziness within you, or whatever it is within you that makes you go against your goal. That's the thing that wakes you up. And you imagine, really think about it. What would you do if your life was perfect? What would you do if every single problem that you ever had was solved? That was actually one of my dreams when I was a kid. I always thought, I was like, I really hope that life, or at least like God or whatever, should bring down like 5 beings that were perfect, that had no flaws, so that they could kind of help the rest of us. But there's a problem with that theory. The problem with that theory is that, first of all, if you have no problems, right? If you just live in a perfect world with no problems, it's like, so then what do? Right? You have no leaping and twinkling of the soul. That's one of the unfortunate realities of humans, is that you start experiencing positive motivation as you start achieving goals, on the way to achieve goals. That's something you see in birds, for example. Birds aren't really that happy when they achieve, when they eat food. They're more happy when they're about to eat food, or where they find some place to hunt. And, well, we're sort of the same way, and the unfortunate reality with that is that, well, we need problems to keep us going, because without problems we would just be, well, laying on our couch doing nothing. It's unfortunate. That's actually something that you see in retired people. So there was a study where you take a retirement home, and there was one group that had full choice over every single thing that they were doing. They were choosing what movie they were watching. They were I think they were raising a plant. They were choosing their food options and all of these things. And the second level, they had food served to them. They had a movie chosen for them. They didn't grow a plant, and all of these things happened. And you ask the question, who died first? And unfortunately, the people on level 2, the people without the choices, actually died first. They actually had first of all, they were less depressed. The people who were on floor 1 were more happy. And also they lived longer. They actually lived longer. It's because they had something resembling goals. So, well, if you ask the question of what happens when you have no goals, what happens when you are sort of lost, and the idea is you decay. You decay rapidly, and well, that's why the Dark Knight needs to rise. So one of the unfortunate realities here is that, okay, Batman decides to wake up, right? Batman decides to wake up, and we move on to the next part. What almost immediately happens? First of all, he realizes that this is Alfred saying, Bane's not some body to mess with. Like, that's really not easy. And then also, he reveals the truth. The truth comes out. And as you start to, we'll go back to the Aladdin example. You go into the cave of wonders. You go down into your own self. What do you find? You find the truth. You find the genie, right, which is something like genius, right? You find the wisdom within yourself. And, well, unfortunately, a lot of it's the stuff that you don't want to hear. So this is when Alfred goes up to him, and remember, he's the representation of the conscience. He comes and he says, listen, that was, Rachel told you that she wanted to die with Harvey Dent. And this idea that you had before, let me bring it up here. Rachel died. This is Bruce Wayne saying, Rachel died knowing we decided to be together. That was my life beyond this cave, and I just can't move on. She didn't, she couldn't. And, well, that's the idea. So what happens is he's stagnating for that reason. He's stagnating based on a lie. And, well, of course, the conscience is going to be the first person to realize that, wait, maybe something's wrong here, right? He's sort of the angel on the shoulder, and, well, he's the first one to realize, wait a second, you're stagnating, and this is not good. And this is something you notice in your own life, right? Whenever I'll go with my example. Whenever I spend 2 hours sitting on the couch doing absolutely nothing, you have that little voice in your head saying, well, I probably should be doing some work, or I probably should be doing something productive. And that's why the conscience sort of realizes it first. He says, wait a second, even though I haven't been able to act out the truth, I'm going to realize the truth. And that's an important step, There was this great story that I really liked. It was by this guy named David Goggins, and he's a very popular figure nowadays, sort of like a self-help guy. And one of the things that he said was, he's actually the archetypal Batman in this scenario. I actually really like that. He said, he was 300 pounds, very overweight, doing some job that he hated just to pay the bills, and every morning when he went home, all he would do was just eat a milkshake. He said a milkshake and a donut. He was really, really just in a bad place. We would say he was really stagnating and decaying, right? He was becoming something like a cripple. And what happened was he kind of woke up. And he had this, we'll say, incredible experience where he has the leaping and twinkling of the soul. For him, it was the Navy SEALs. And he said that he realized one of his flaws was that he always told lies. Like, he told lies to himself and he also told lies to other people. And one of the things he did to remedy this was every time he lied to somebody, every time he told a lie, he would, like sort of like the habitual lies that you tell somebody. Like we kind of do this all the time, these little white lies. He said whenever he lied to somebody, he would walk away, end the conversation, realize that he lied, and he'd have to walk back up to them and say, hey, listen, I'm sorry, man, I just lied to you back there. And doing that, like, imagine how difficult that is. That's a radical, extreme, difficult idea, but, well, that's genius, right? That's genius. That's combining sort of the action with the thought, the axiom, we'll say the dogma that you need to tell the truth is something that we don't really act out. The question is, how do you actually act it out? And the answer is something like that. To be able to achieve something like that, you need to first realize that you're doing something wrong. And this is what Batman's doing. And then we're going to watch as he plays out sort of the somewhat radical proposals that he decides to do to, well, tell the truth, right? To be a hero, right? I've come to the conclusion that the archetypal hero, there are many ways that you could define the hero, but one of the ways to define them is he who integrates or unifies his thoughts and his actions. Because really, that's what it is, right? Really, that's what it is. You imagine that everybody wants to do good in the world. Everybody thinks that someday they're going to do good in the world, but everybody says that they're going to go to charity, but you're not a hero for thinking that. You're not a hero for believing that someday you're gonna give to charity. There was a great quote that I really liked. It was something like, "The smallest act of kindness is greater than the grandest intention," and well, that's the idea right there. The hero is the one who acts it out. The hero is, no matter how grand of a scale, it's not somebody who runs into burning buildings and saves children, right? It's just somebody who acts out the things that they know that they should do, or acts out the things that bring them closer to the ideal person. Something like that. And well, so this is the first step, right? So Batman hasn't really been acting it out. He's just been a thinker. I like to think of it as something like that. You think of the thinker statue. That's an archetype right there. This thinker statue who sits with his hand on his knee, and he sits there. And what's the problem with the thinker, right? He's thinking and he's doing a great job, right? He's doing great, but he's not doing anything. He's sitting. He's idle, and well, the archetypal hero is somebody who, we'll say, combines that with action, who combines that with, what was the archetype that symbolized action? I don't remember it for now. But anyways, God, who is action? I don't know, but so what happens is, so now Bruce decides that he's gonna separate from his conscience, right? He's gonna separate from his conscience, and this is what you do when you tell lies, right? You have this little thought that says maybe you've been on the wrong path, and then you say, no, conscience, shut up. I don't want to deal with you, right? That's the devil on the shoulder. So that's what happens. Batman kind of separates from his conscience, and he lives without the butler. He lives without Alfred, and here's a really good idea that I like, and well, they do it really perfectly here. So the idea of, what is the idea, and we've explored this in the idea of Batman Begins, but what is the idea of your parent dying, right? Thomas Wayne dying is the symbolism of, okay, my dad has died, therefore I must take the lessons that Thomas Wayne gave me and put them into myself, right? I am going to, well, I don't need Thomas Wayne anymore. I don't need my father anymore because I am Thomas Wayne, right? I've embraced Thomas Wayne. I've embraced the, we'll say, characteristics of Thomas Wayne, the personality of Thomas Wayne, and that's what all of Batman Begins was about. So now you ask the question, what does it mean when the conscience leaves him, when Batman separates from Alfred? Well, you could say maybe in the beginning it's the idea that he separates from his conscience and things aren't really going well. But when he takes up Alfred's roles, right, when he starts becoming the butler, and, what they do is they make him start answering the door for the first time in his life. What he's doing is, for now, he's no longer separated from his conscience. Him and his conscience aren't two different people. Alfred is out of the picture now, and he is going to be a fully integrated person. He doesn't need that sort of external person to debate with. His conscience is a part of him. It's the same idea. So that's something that Batman's going to have to struggle with sort of as we go along. And well, he's going to have to struggle with it in relationships, right? He's going to have to struggle with it in relationships, and that's sort of the next step as we're coming here. So Bruce Wayne, he loses all of his money, right? That's sort of the symbolism of, okay, when you decide to get back in the game, you're going to be a little bit rusty. That's the idea of the undeveloped self. After 8 years of stagnation, you're not going to be the same person that you once were. But anyways, you have Miranda Tate here. So what he does is he realizes that he loses all of his money, right? That's sort of like a plot point. Loses all of his money, and now Wayne Enterprises is going under. So what he has to do now is he has to take rash action. He has to take rash action, and he has to put his trust into somebody. And unfortunately, he decides to put his trust in Miranda Tate. So you have this idea of the reactor. This reactor is something that, well, it could do a lot of good, right? It could offer clean energy to the entire city, but it also could be a nuclear bomb. And you think about that as a representation of a relationship, right? You think about relationship and you say, okay, if I have a good relationship, then it could provide, we'll say, lasting meaningfulness, whatever that means, right? Whatever you think of as a good relationship. But then you also think about what happens if you never develop any relationships, if you remain as Batman is with his trust issues and sort of clinging on to Rachel, what really happens is you explode, right? You fall apart, and well, just like Gotham, Batman is going to fall apart. So that's sort of the symbolism there. And unfortunately, he gives his trust to Talia. And God, it's not easy, right? It's not easy. This is an idea that it was explored also in Beauty and the Beast. In Beauty and the Beast, you have, it's like Belle, right? Belle is the princess or girl, right? And the Beast, and we could say this is Bruce Wayne, has a part of himself, right? He has a castle, and in his West Wing, he doesn't let anybody go in there, and that's where he has, like, the rose. That's where he has the rose that he was cursed with. And what he does is he doesn't let anybody into his West Wing. You could say he puts up a thick front, and he doesn't really trust anybody. He doesn't really let himself become vulnerable. And, well, what he does is, eventually, and this is the story of Beauty and the Beast, he lets Belle in, and Belle sort of, opens him up, right? That's the idea. She opens him up. She opens up a wing within his house and a wing within his soul, you could say. And, well, we could say that's a properly developing relationship, right? That's pretty good. You need someone to open you up. And this is one of the things that I've noticed it's something really, really weird. And this is something I've sort of verified amongst a lot of the guy friends that I have. It's weird that you could have a specific type of conversation with a guy, like, it doesn't even have to be surface level, but yeah, you have the things like sports and like, you're always doing things, you're always playing sports, playing video games, like, whatever you're doing, you're always doing stuff, and you have a specific type of conversation there. But whenever you, as a guy, you have a conversation with a woman, it's a completely different conversation. It's like, well, first of all, it's more deep more meaningful. You're a little bit more vulnerable, and you're talking about the things that you never talk about with a guy. And, well, that's sort of the idea, right? That's sort of the idea. You can imagine that the feminine here is sort of like the West Wing, and the West Wing for the beast. And what the feminine does is it kind of opens them up. And, well, the only thing that you need to do is you need to trust, right? You need to trust the girl to be vulnerable enough to her. It's like very simple idea. The unfortunate reality in this movie, and I really like this, is that he gives the trust to the wrong person, right? He opens up his West Wing. He gives all of his trust to this feminine character, and, well, she eventually destroys it. We see her as sort of like a sexual character, right? She's a potential mate, right? That's sort of the way that he looks at her, and right, they hook up and all these things happen, and we could say he's opening up to her, right? That's what he's doing. He's becoming vulnerable, and first of all, that takes courage, but at the same time, could be misplaced, right? It's actually quite unfortunate, and well, now's a good time to. Now that I kind of explained Beauty and the Beast, I think I could kind of go in deeper and explain a little bit as to what I mean by opening up the feminine, right? It's a Jungian idea, and it's a really, really strong idea, but it's actually one of his more popular ideas. But I want to make sure I talk about it. I talked about it a little bit in Batman Begins, but I'll talk about it here. So Jung defines we'll say the feminine within a man as the anima. Anima is the Greek word. It's the Greek word for spirit, and well, it's the feminine version, right? There's the anima for the feminine, and there's the animus for the masculine within a woman. And he defines the anima as the feminine spirit that lies within a man, and he says he defines it as the chaotic urge to life. That's the way that he defines it. He says that, well, it's something that you see. It's like whenever a guy gets into a relationship with a girl, it's so much more meaningful than anything that he's ever done in his entire life. And this is something that I've noticed. It's like, okay, I thought I was living a good life until I got into a relationship, and then it like changed my life completely. It rose the ceiling completely on what my life really could be and how potentially happy I could be. And well, that's sort of the idea. The idea is that there's a part of you that represents life itself, right? The feminine represents life itself, and we spend most of our lives sort of detached from it. But when you actually get in touch with it, when you actually sort of corral it and understand it, then you experience a more full picture of life. And it's a really interesting idea. One thing that he says about the anima, and this is something that you could confirm with your actual experience, is that when two people get into a relationship, and this is sort of like, he says this is like the first stages of a relationship, which I could sort of agree. It's not really you get into a relationship with that person, and then they get a relationship with you, right? That's sort of what we think. But really what's happening is you are getting in touch with the feminine anima aspect of yourself, and you're projecting that image upon her, and she's projecting the animus, the masculine image, onto you. And it's a completely different idea. It explains things so much better, because when you say that, well, you imagine that you get into a relationship, something like this, right? He only sees a part of her. Well, that's actually, this is really, really good. So what Bruce Wayne does is he only sees the part of her that he wants to see. He projects an ideal onto her. He says, this is the relationship that I want to have. And I don't care what's happening in actual reality, right? I don't care if this is actually true. All I care about is, well, this is how I see it. And this is something that you'll notice when you begin a relationship. I start to have these sort of ideas, right, of where the relationship could go. Start to have these fantasies of how amazing it could be, and sort of like the potential paradise that I could sort of go along with. And that's sort of the idea that's happening here. It's like I'm projecting my ideal, my anima image, my feminine spirit onto that person, and so are they. And the problem with that, and this is the main problem that Batman experiences here, is you're not actually in a relationship with that person. You're in a relationship with the ideal that you've placed for yourself. And, well, that's the honeymoon phase in the relationship. That's exactly what that is. But what ends up happening is, well, you could say, it could be after 6 months. It could be after 4 years. Usually the honeymoon period, on average, statistically lasts around 4 years. 4 years. And after that time, after that image starts to fade, eventually what you're left with is the actual person, right? You're left with, okay, I only saw the good in you. I only saw the things that I wanted to see. And, well, that's what makes people get into a relationship, right? You look at the good upon them, and you see them sort of as perfect. You don't really see that many flaws in them, but after a while, that starts to fade away, and you start to see the flaws in them, and the anima image kind of fades, and, well, that's when you start to see them as a human, really. And that's what Batman's going to kind of struggle with here. This is something that it's not easy. There's actually an idea in How I Met Your Mother that I thought was really, really relevant, and it's a great way of conceptualizing it. It's this idea of glass shattering, right? You imagine that, well, he had a girlfriend, and this is Ted Mosby. He had a girlfriend, and she talked too much. But when he was in a relationship with her, and he didn't really notice. He didn't notice because all he cared about was, oh yeah, maybe I'm going to marry her someday, or, this is going really well. Like, I really, really like her, and he only sees the good in her. But he just didn't notice that she talked too much. He didn't really notice that she had this major flaw. And all it took was his friends to say, did you realize that she really talks a lot? For the glass to shatter. For the perfect, pristine, we'll say champagne glass to shatter all over the floor, and well, that's a perfect representation. It's the anima image, the pedestal, the ideal in which you put her upon, shatters, and then you see her for what she really is. And, well, we could say that's where Batman is at now. He's at that point. He's at this point of, well, his anima, right, his inner feminine is locked up. His inner feminine is with Rachel, right? That's exactly where it is. He's in the point where, well, things are not really going well, and he had a bad past relationship, and he doesn't really know how to handle it, and, well, you could think of Rachel dying, right? Rachel dying to the Joker as not her actually dying. You could think of her dying as just something like them breaking up, or something like her cheating on him, or whatever, right? Something that causes the death of the relationship instead of the death of Rachel herself. And that would be something like the death of Rachel in relation to him. So that's exactly what Batman's struggling with. And you could say, what does his anima look like right now? What does his trust in women or trust in relationships look like right now? It looks something like Talia al Ghul. It looks something like, I'll get you the picture. It looks something like that. The woman that's going to stab him on the side and try to destroy Gotham because, well, she's the symbol of nihilism. She's the symbol of the losing of all hope, right? She's the symbol of losing all hope in relationships, in this case. Losing all hope in, well, the future, in potential. And that's where Batman was in the beginning, right? Batman, in the beginning of this movie, said, there's nothing out there for me. And that's what his anima looks like right now. So let's move on, and we'll move on to what can his anima be, right? What is the potential anima that exists within him? We'll call this the plan B, the path B, and or maybe the road less traveled, if you want to use a Robert Frost poem. It lies in this girl, Anne Hathaway, right? Catwoman. And so what does he do? So he meets up with her, and she says she's going to lead him to Bane, and he says to her, "I'm going to offer you a clean slate." And I really like this idea of clean slate, but I think I already explained it to you. It's the fact that, well, we could say that Catwoman has a past, a bad past, and so does Batman. So what does Batman want to do? He wants to start over, refresh, get rid of it, and stop being under control by his past, because that's the problem with Catwoman. Catwoman is being constantly chased by her past, and she can't really shake it off. And, well, that's the idea here of, well, that's another representation here of Scar, right? Of Scar in Lion King, and also the Scar of Anakin, right? He's being chased by his past, and he can't really let it go, and since he really can't let it go, he's, well, we could say one of the manifestations of that is he just says, I'm not ready, I'm not developed enough to handle a full-fledged relationship. I'm not ready to handle something if I'm still being chased by my past. And, well, that's what Anne Hathaway's struggling with. So he offers her this clean slate, and not only is it a clean slate for her, but it's a clean slate for him, and that's why they sort of agree to work together. So she says she's going to lead him to Bane, and what does she do? She leads him to Bane, and she tricks him, right? She tricks him. So she locks him up, and she puts him in a one-on-one fight with Bane, in which, well, he knows he's kind of screwed. So I think that's a good place to stop for here, right? Stop for now, because, well, I think we could kind of, now that we understand kind of what that means, or what Talia al Ghul meant, it's really simple to understand what Anne Hathaway meant, right? You know, he gives all of his trust to both of them. He gives all of his trust to Talia al Ghul. He gives all of his trust to Anne Hathaway, Catwoman, and both of them betray him. Both of them betray him, and, well, that's the hero's journey right there. That's the hero's journey. It's like when you decide to become vulnerable, when you decide to put your all into whatever goal that it could be, there's the chance that it gets back at you, and there's the chance that it literally kills you. And this is something that you'll notice in just a simple friendship. It's like, okay, you say you want to have a best friend. It's like, okay, you go and you have that best friend, and the thing about your best friend is that you share, essentially, there are parts of you that you don't share, but you share essentially every single part of you with your best friend, and you share every single part of you with, we'll say, a group, if you want to join a group, a social group. And, well, the unfortunate reality is there are so many unfortunate realities that could come from it. You can get ostracized. You can get judged. You can get, we'll say, bullied, criticized. There are all these potential things that could happen to you, and that's why people don't do it, right? That's why a guy doesn't want to approach a woman at a bar, and that's why a woman doesn't want to let a man in and kind of wants to keep him apart, and that's why you say that we establish these sort of barriers in society. That's why I don't tell. There was a great social experiment that I ran in one of my classes. It was a really simple social experiment. All I said was, are any of you willing to share your deepest, darkest secret right now? The thing that you don't tell your best friend, don't tell your parents, don't tell, your therapist, whatever, right? The things that you don't tell to anybody and you sort of keep locked up within yourself. Are you willing to stand up right now in front of it was like 20 people. Are you willing to stand up and say it? And nobody stood up, right? Nobody stood up, and it was, it's a simple, it's a universal truth that we don't sort of put ourselves out there for everybody, and we selectively disclose information to people, because the unfortunate reality is if we were to share something too deep about ourselves, or if we were to share something flawed about ourselves, then you could get the worst possible thing could happen to you. You could get socially humiliated. You could get ostracized. And there's this one example that I really, really liked. I still remember this to this day. I think it was from freshman year of high school. But one of my friends went up to me, and I wouldn't call him the most hygienic kid, and I wouldn't call myself the most hygienic kid at that time. And he came up to me and he said, we were just having a nice conversation, and we were in a flow, and he says, when you go out of the bathroom, do you wash your hands with both hands, or do you just kind of like turn the nozzle and wash your hand with one and then call it a day? And when he said that, I could feel the tension in his voice, right? I could feel like, wow, I'm admitting something to myself that I've probably never told anybody, and it's kind of weird, and I might really get judged for it. And I said, actually, yes, like I actually did do that. And when I told him that, he was so relieved. Like, he literally started laughing. He's like, wow, I thought I was the only person who does this. I thought I was the only person that struggles, or at least not struggles, but has this little quirk. But you could imagine the opposite reaction. I could say, dude, are you kidding me? You don't wash your hands? Like, that's gross. And I realize to this day it's pretty gross. But, if I say that, and he would, you could imagine how he feels. And, well, that would be the representation of this, of exactly what Catwoman's doing here. Literally putting your all out there, and, well, them not reciprocating, them sort of seeing you as a tool, because that's exactly what Anne Hathaway does, or Catwoman does. I'm sorry, I keep saying Anne Hathaway, but that's what she does. She says, okay, I'm going to take your vulnerability that you give me, and I'm going to turn it on itself, turn it on its head, and use it for my own self-interest. And that's what a lot of people do, right? That's literally what gossip is. It's like, okay, I tell you something really personal about myself, and then you go to your other friend and say, well, Nick told me a funny story the other day, and it's kind of embarrassing, don't tell anybody, but blah, blah, blah. And then you end up getting judged, and you end up with having people laugh at you. And, well, roughly you could say the two largest fears that any person has, and you could sort of split it down into categories, but the two biggest fears that any person has is death and social humiliation, because, well, social humiliation leads to ostracization, which leads to death. And, well, this is maybe one of the worst things that could possibly happen.